5 mistakes that people make when starting a side business that they eventually want to turn into their full-time gig. Those mistakes are the things that keep them trapped in the job and never able to leave. I'm going to identify exactly what they are so you can overcome them and give you actionable steps to make sure that you're able to leave your job quicker than you ever thought possible. So keep watching. There's 2 types of clients that I typically work with, and they come into 2 different categories. Category 1 is the type of person who is on a basic wage already and they're starting a side hustle that they eventually want to leave their job. But when they're starting that, they'd actually be happy if they could just earn £1,500 per month to cover their basic food, rent, all that kind of stuff. So they've already got low living expenses and they're just trying to make that transition. And then the second type of client is the high income earners. Now the high income earners, they need to be earning maybe 5, 10 or more £1,000 per month before they're able to leave their job. That's typically because their expenses have exceeded. So they're not at a place where they can live as frugally because they've already locked in a lot of these different things. So they have high expenses, which means that they can't make that transition as easy. So when it comes down to it, I would actually say that it's easier to be in category 1 than it is in category 2. Although the people in category 2 should have the money, a lot of the time the expenses have then exceeded. Or it's just that kind of potentially that ego thing, right? Where they've earned so much, and why would they want to go backwards? So they don't want to necessarily make that kind of sacrifice. And it's still possible to do and be able to transition when you're earning a high income that replaces that job. But obviously it's far easier in the category 1 because they can just make moves that allow them to do that much quicker, and then they can put full time in the business. So they tend to get further. But there are ways in which category 2 can get ahead as well. So I'm going to talk about both sides of it so you get a clear understanding depending on which stage or which category then you're in to make the right decision for you to be able to build a business that allows you to leave your job. First mistake I see people make is seeing your business and your salaried income as separate. So essentially they see them as 2 completely different parts. So I'm going to quote Jay-Z here and say that I'm not a businessman, I'm a businessman, right? So you've got to see everything that you do, the accumulation of all the things that you do as one thing. You are the business and your whole entire income is the business. It's because you are the business, especially when you're starting out, right? So you need to see them as a whole. So I'm going to be looking at how I can take the money from the job income and then put that within my actual business and seeing them as not separate entities, but as a whole. So I'm looking at the accumulation of all the money that I can make, not just the money that I can make in the business as a side, right? So treat that time accordingly. Mistake number 2 then is now knowing that you are the business, your allocation of resources. So the mistake is not allocating resources accordingly based on what you have to your disposal. This primarily comes down to time and money. So time is the most important asset we have, and that is what people are not really looking at. So if you're on a high income salary, you've typically got less time because you have a higher demanding job in many cases. There's a lot demanding of you, and that's why you get paid the big bucks, right? So the other thing is then time. So if you've got a limited amount of time, but you have resource of money, then you can use that money to leverage what you don't have in time. Whereas if you're on a lower income salary and hopefully that you've got more flexibility then to be able to do things, or even then you could even leave your job right earlier or pick up side hustles like deliveries or driving for Uber or something that would then increase your income. And you might be able to make the same kind of money just driving Uber as you would in your job. So that time allocation could be more condensed, so that gives you more time to work on your business. So you've got options then, essentially. So you've got to look at it differently depending on which situation you're in. If you're in the higher income salary, then you want to look at using your money to buy time. And if you're in the other predicament, then you look at covering expenses elsewhere because you might not be that passionate about that job, which is in the low income bracket, and allocating time to Uber or deliveries or something along those lines, which would be quick money coming in, and then working on your business, giving you more time to work on the business, right? So you have more time to put in because you don't have the money then necessarily. And I literally have friends who drive Uber who make 4 or 5 grand a month just driving Uber on the weekends. So if you're thinking like, how am I going to do that? You could essentially allocate your weekends for driving Uber, and then you've got the full time in the weekday to work on that business, and eventually you transition over. So your main business that you want to focus on will then support that, so you don't have to drive Uber and you build something from there. So just in case you're wondering, is it even possible to do? Like literally, I was blown away by like how much people can make on Uber. Like it was crazy. So the first thing that we need to do is take a time audit and understand what tasks are we doing. So if you look at over a 3-month period, what tasks are you actually doing at any given time? And you start to see what tasks are in the business that you can then either do or delegate. So the first thing we need to do then is do the audit. The second thing is we need to allocate how much our time is actually worth. So if you're saying your time is worth, let's say £50, anything that is less valuable at that time, we then would delegate or delete, right? So we either delegate to somebody else who can do it. So things like data entry, other tasks that are not a high value to you, you can then delegate to other people. And other things that might not even need doing, you can just delete and make sure that you don't do them at all. Take a client of mine in the property investing space. They're trying to build their property portfolio. So in order to do that, what they could do is look at ringing agents each day and booking viewings. But because their time is limited, they've only then got the weekend to do viewings. If they've only got the weekend to do the viewings, that's quite hard anyway. And also they're trying to call within working hours. So that's also going to be quite difficult. So they've got all these different restrictions around them. But there's actually an easier option for them once they understand the value of their time. Instead then of going and spending time with their kids, they're then on viewings and doing things that are on high value to the business either. So with that being said, let's have a look at the numbers to justify why this is a good decision to start being able to look at things that you can really leverage that allow you to do the things that you want to do. So let's do the simple math behind this decision. So £50 per hour is what we're saying that the time is worth. If we then allocated the time they're spending to the business, let's say that's 20 hours trying to find a deal. So that's 20 hours per week. And we're going to times that by 4. If we times that by 4, then it gives us £4,000 per month that they're essentially allocating to their business. So that's their contribution in terms of their hours in the regards to the value of their time. And I would say that it could take up to about 3 months then of doing this consistently to get a deal. Now, when you look at it, that means that their time allocation in terms of value of that £4,000 per month, if it's going to take 3 months, then it's going to be £12,000 worth of time invested just trying to find one deal. This is not to mention all the extra time for systems and setup and making sure they got a process that works. The other side of it is also the little unknowns. It's not necessarily that they're definitely going to get a deal. Whereas if they had that £4,000, they could then look for somebody who is proficient at what it is that they do and then be able to exchange their money for their time and experience and knowledge, right? So if I'm able to pay that person who's then going to give me a deal, I would have been way better off. Now, all you have to do then is minus that 4,000 from the 12. That leaves you with a saving of £8,000. So you're actually saving £8,000 and you can look at the right deal for you. So instead of trying to do all the things that you don't want to do, it's actually better to pay someone. Even though it seems like a lot of money, it's actually cheaper than you think. Additionally, if a deal falls through, there's no sunken cost in time that they would have allocated. This would just be on the back of the person that they were buying the deal from. So if the deal fell through for whatever reason, it wouldn't have been the 3 months that they were trying to accumulate that time. It would have been on the other person. And usually in those scenarios, they would be being paid on results. So they're not necessarily going to get anything if that deal doesn't go through. So you've got that security there for you. So it's actually a lot safer to be spending money with other people than it is to actually do it yourself in many cases. Meaning that they can get the process done much faster, and that time for them eventually being able to leave their job, they then can then go full-time later on and build the systems, the processes with the foundations of the money that they're making from the cash flow of building that portfolio or that business. If it was in an allocation of the business, they would have already been making money, which would give them the confidence to leave that job and then go full-time. The ability to be able to pay someone means that they can do it much faster. Ultimately, we need to allocate our time and money accordingly because it's a scarce resource when you're starting out. The third mistake then is not focusing on cash flow. So if you ever heard of Rich Dad Poor Dad or read the books, you've heard of the Cashflow Quadrant. If you haven't heard the Cashflow Quadrant, I'm going to lay it out simply for you right now. So what you've got is 4 different quadrants, and I'll show you that now on the screen. So if you're looking at it, you've got this section right here, which you start off with E, which is employed. I told you I was terrible at writing and drawing. So the first one is employed. The second one is the S, which is self-employed. Then you've got B, which is owner, business owner. Then you've got I, which is then investor. So employed is you've essentially got a job, right? Job. Self-employed is you own a job. Business owner is where you own a system and process. Where you could have like employees and a process for delivering results. And then investor is where your money works for you. Now, when most people go around the transition, they're doing it a bit like this, where they go from employed to self-employed, self-employed to business owner to investors. And what most people try and do is skip a step and go from employed directly to investor. It's not to say you can't, you can, but the problem you've got is that when you do this, it's going to take you far longer to do that transition than it is to do this or to do this. So you've either got to look at going from here or to here. The simplest transition then really is becoming a somewhat of a specialist. This is what I would call it, is when you're employed and then you go and do the exactly same thing that you were doing in your job, but get paid for it. So that's the easiest transition. A much harder transition then is going from employed to business owner, because depending on how you've done it, if you're doing something in the same industry as you're already in, or you're learning completely new skills, I would definitely go along the lines of going self-employed, because you've got more flexibility and also you are ahead. You're not playing on a level playing field. You're competing against other people, but you have experience in that game, at least on delivering. Whereas if you go straight to business owner, you don't necessarily have that. So there is advantages of doing it. But what a lot of people do is try and go from one of these steps, like employed to investor, and it's just going to take you a lot longer. If you're willing to take that time, then that's completely fine. But most people want to leave their job a lot earlier. So if you're going to leave your job earlier, you're going to need something that has this systems and processes built in so that you have the flexibility and freedom. Because even if you're self-employed, you're owning a job, you're going to be working. It's when you get people to work with you or for you, or you have a system that delivers that service for people, or service or product or whatever it is, then you've got something a lot more scalable and passive. And then you look at that investor role after that. So make sure you're building cash flow. Cash flow allows you to look at how you get points of leverage. You're the least leveraged as an employee, and then you're the most leveraged as an investor. And you go through that process of becoming unleveraged to leveraged. So let's take, for example, the fact that if you were going to employ to investor, it could take you potentially up to 10 years. And I know a lot of people who've actually, it's taken them 10 years to get to the point where they're in that place where they're replacing their income. So it can take a long time. What we ultimately want to do then is accelerate that ability. So acceleration comes from adding additional cash flow. If we can add cash flow and we can build, then we can have a larger pot to put in so that we can then invest that money. So we can become better investors by having more capital to put down and allocate. So building the cash flow, building the pot allows us to rapidly be able to make these transitions. And that's what we want to do. We want to make transitions as quickly as possible by building cash flow, building that ability to invest and accelerate our process so that we can buy investments and then continue to move on and grow and grow and grow. So we're ultimately the most leveraged point, which is where we have money working for us. The best thing then we can do is build a business that can sustain those investments. And what we look at doing ultimately is building a business, building leverage within the business by hiring systems, and then build that pot from the business and then reallocating into our investments. So making sure that we're constantly putting aside money, a certain capital allocation each and every month. And we're able to do, say, for example, we were earning, let's say, £50,000 in our job, but we're earning £250,000 in our business, and we're able to take home maybe, let's say, £150,000 then in the business. That's 3 times the money that we're able to allocate. Now, obviously, we've got taxes and all those kind of things, but let's say if we're able to allocate 3 times more, we've got that exponential growth that we can have a lot quicker because we're allocating more. And then once we put that into time, we can get to that investor column much, much quicker. Most people, though, ultimately sway towards the idea of becoming an investor because of the security aspect of buying assets. So there's more security in buying an asset than there is becoming a business owner as such. But the skills and the abilities that you build becoming a business owner allow you to become a much better investor. And I would argue that, and even Warren Buffett has argued that, he's actually a businessman at heart. If you look at Warren Buffett, he actually started in business, not in investing. So you could see how having businesses at an early age has really impacted the value that he sees within investments and the ability to be able to take the money that he had and invest, which has really accelerated what he's been able to do. If we are then trying to eliminate as much risk as possible, we need to do this with the security blanket of a salary. So that's why when you're in a job or you're in self-employed, more security obviously being employed, then that gives you the freedom to build that side business, because even if you swing for the fences and miss, you've got that security blanket of income salary coming in. And if you're going to take the risk, you may as well take it earlier rather than later. So depending on your age, you've got other options, right? If you're earlier and you're doing it a bit younger, and even if you're 40, I mean, you could take another swing at doing the business, I think, and be in the job. And you know that at least you've got 10 years to come around otherwise and reallocate. So if you swing, you could turn everything around in a 3 to 5 year gap, right? Or you could do it in 10. So I would rather make sure that I could swing for 3 years, still be in employment and swing and try and build a business over the next 3 years and get to a point where I'm able to transition and then allocate capital than I was going 10 years of just being employed. But that's just me, and it's all down to personal preference ultimately. But my real advice would be start the side business, stay in employment for as long as you possibly can until it makes sense to leave. And I would probably say at least you're making the same kind of money as you're making in your job or more before you then transition over. I know that some people have gone through the process of doing it earlier, but you need to make sure that you're having a scalable, repeatable process in place and you've got confidence within the business model. A lot of people just leave and they haven't even got that, and they haven't got real business coming in and they haven't got consistency in their revenue, and they're going to leave their job. That's really, really frightening because they're just taking a punt and it's not certainty. As business owners, as the investor that you should be in the way that you're thinking about decisions, is you mitigate risk as much as possible. And when you know that you've got revenue coming in, you can be much more confident in making that transition from being employed to being a business owner or self-employed. So the fourth mistake that people make is that they start a business just to make cash. Now, obviously, you want to make money in your business. That's definitely a priority. But what people leave out is the fact that they're not thinking about the quality of the money that they make. So instead of asking about how much money you make, think of the quality of money you make. And in order to do that, I always ask people, is this something that you really want to do, or is this just something you want to make money from? Very different answers come out of people's mouths. A lot of the time, they're doing it just to make money, and that makes it far harder to stick to the thing that they want to do, and they'll look for other options, because if they're not getting results immediately, then in their head, they can look for something that they potentially find more fulfilling. So knowing what is going to fulfill you a lot more makes a lot more sense, because really the thing is, once you've got money coming in, you'll feel a lot more fulfilled. It's kind of a self-fulfilling prophecy. If I'm looking for something and I'm feeling out of touch with something, it's because I haven't got the revenue there to support it. And you find people in businesses that they don't really love, and they can do it for a long time, but it's because the revenue is proven. But if you've got that opportunity of quality of money, then why wouldn't you go for something that you actually have enjoyment for? A lot of people then that I talk to in both brackets, the low income earners typically do hate their jobs. The high income earners don't hate their jobs because they followed a career path that was of passion of theirs. So they would typically be better off actually going and getting a self-employed role of the thing that they're already doing, but transitioning to an industry or applicable possible industry to the one that they want to be in. So if I was an accountant, or I was in an accounting firm of some sort, then I could go and be a property accountant if I was looking to get into property, and I could be around it, engage with the people around the business and the kind of industry, but not be doing a business that's directly a property business dealing with the properties. Then that could be a lot more flexible and a lot more fulfilling for you if you've got a skill that other people don't have, which means that you can get ahead. Which is one of the things I always talk about, is making sure that you've got a favorable advantage so that you can always look at the opportunities to get ahead when the competition is there. You've got something that's a competitive advantage, so make sure that you use that. The final mistake then is not knowing that businesses have seasons. So there's two seasons in business that we need to be aware of: the season where you're sowing and the season where you're reaping. So the season where you're sowing is where you're putting in the work and you're grafting and you're trying to make something. The thing is, when you're trying to start a side business that's eventually going to be your main business, then you're going to be in the period where you're sowing. And the period in your sowing is that time of grind. Where you're reaping is reaping the rewards of what it is that you've made. But until you can really leave your job, you're not in a position to be able to reap those rewards. You just have to keep on grinding and you have to keep on doing, because really there's only three things. And this comes back to when I started in business, and it's something that stuck with me completely through the whole time in business, and it's become so much more of a reality the longer that I've been in business, and I realize it. So when you're trying to sow, you only have two other things besides the business. Well, if that one of those things is taking a massive chunk of your time, which is your job, so you only have the business and the job, and you only get one other thing. That one other thing can be family, it could be your health, it could be friends, but you only get one other thing. And you notice that you're going to sacrifice other things in your life in order to make this business successful. But you need to know that you're going to make sacrifices. And for me, when I'm in a season of sowing, I want to be focusing on still at least maintaining my health. So I'm going to focus on the business, I'm going to focus on my health, and I'm going to focus on my family. Those are the things that are important. And then when I'm out of that season, then I can start talking to friends and doing other things. But otherwise, I'm going to be pushing and making sure that I'm focused on the business, my health, which allows me to perform better at business, and my family, which is what I'm doing it all for. So you need to understand the values that you have for yourself. So really here, you need to be conscious of what you're willing to give up, and you are going to have to make sacrifices more than you've probably even realized. Even if you feel like you're making sacrifices now, you're probably going to have to make even more to get to where you want to be, because it does take a lot, and it's far more than anybody ever realizes. But if you're willing to take those sacrifices and you're willing to do it for the short-term pain, for the long-term gain, then you can get ahead and you can win. By the way, below I've got linked exact process that we use to build clients to 20 to 30K per month in their property investment business. It's completely free, but it takes you through the entire process. It's kind of like a flow chart telling you what to do and what not to do. And if things are not working, what things you should do in order to continue to grow that business. It's all linked free below in the comments. So go check that out. And I'd love to hear how you found it. So go check it out. I'll see you on the next one.